I never thought I'd be the one to save the day. Not me, Emma Thompson, the janitor's daughter who spent most of her 12 years being invisible in the gleaming corridors of Meridian Industries. But here I am, standing in the most important boardroom in Chicago, watching grown adults panic in 3 different languages, and somehow I'm the only one who can fix this mess. It started like any other Tuesday morning. I was supposed to be in 7th grade math class, struggling with algebraic equations that seemed as foreign to me as the French words now flying around this room. Instead, I was here because Dad had forgotten his security badge again, and Mom was working her second job at the downtown diner. Someone had to bring it to him, and that someone was always me. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt different today. Usually, I'd ride up with Dad, listening to him hum old Beatles songs while he adjusted his blue maintenance uniform. Today, I rode alone, clutching his badge in my sweaty palm, watching the numbers climb higher and higher. The elevator was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. When the doors opened, I stepped into what felt like a war zone. The executive floor, normally pristine and intimidatingly quiet, was buzzing with frantic energy. Secretaries were running between offices, their heels clicking frantically against the marble floors. Phones were ringing everywhere, creating a symphony of corporate chaos that made my chest tighten with anxiety. I found Dad in the maintenance closet, methodically organizing his cleaning supplies as if the world wasn't falling apart around him. That's Dad for you, steady as a rock, even when everything else is crumbling. His weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency, arranging bottles of cleaning solution in perfect rows. When he saw me, his tired brown eyes lit up with that familiar mixture of love and concern that always made me feel simultaneously protected and guilty. "Emma, sweetheart, you shouldn't be here today," he said, taking his badge from my outstretched hand. His voice carried that gentle authority that had guided me through scraped knees and broken hearts for 12 years. "Something big is happening upstairs. The French investors are here, and everyone's running around like chickens with their heads cut off. I should have left then. Should have taken the elevator back down, walked the 6 blocks to Jefferson Middle School, and pretended I'd been sick." But something about the way Dad's forehead creased with worry, the way his shoulders seemed to carry the weight of more than just his own concerns, made me stay. I couldn't shake the feeling that this chaos was somehow connected to our family's future, to the tiny apartment we called home, to the second-hand textbooks I carried to school every day. The sound of raised voices drifted down the hallway, punctuated by what sounded like very frustrated French. My stomach dropped as I recognized the tone. It was the same one my teachers used when they were about to give up on a particularly difficult student. Except this time, the stakes felt infinitely higher. "Dad, what's really going on?" I asked, settling onto an overturned bucket that served as Dad's unofficial office chair. The maintenance closet smelled like pine disinfectant and old coffee. Familiar scents that usually comforted me but today felt suffocating. He paused in his organizing, his hands stilling on a bottle of glass cleaner. When he looked at me, I saw something I'd never seen before in his eyes. Genuine fear. Not the kind of fear that comes from monsters under the bed or scary movies, but the deep, adult kind of fear that comes from understanding just how fragile everything really is. "The company's in trouble, Emma. Big trouble. Those French investors upstairs, they're the only ones who can save us. But something went wrong with the translator they hired. She got sick this morning, and now nobody can communicate properly. Mr. Harrison is up there trying to manage millions of dollars in negotiations, and half the people in that room can't understand what the other half is saying." I felt my world tilt slightly. Meridian Industries wasn't just some faceless corporation to me. It was Dad's job. Our health insurance, the reason we could afford the small apartment near the good school district. If the company failed, where would that leave us? Where would that leave Dad, who'd worked here for 15 years, who took pride in keeping every surface spotless, who knew every employee's name and asked about their families? "Can't they just use Google Translate or something?" I asked, though even as the words left my mouth I knew how naive they sounded. Dad's laugh was hollow, tinged with the kind of desperation that adults try to hide from children. "Business doesn't work that way, sweetheart. These people are talking about contracts worth millions of dollars, technical specifications, legal terminology. One wrong word could cost everyone their jobs. The weight of his words settled on my shoulders like a heavy blanket. Everyone's jobs, not just Dad's, but the security guard who always waved at me when I visited, the receptionist who kept candy in her desk drawer, the maintenance crew who worked alongside Dad every day. Suddenly, the chaos upstairs felt personal, urgent, terrifying. That's when I heard it. A string of rapid French echoing down the hallway, followed by an English voice raised in frustration. My heart started racing, but not from fear, from recognition. Because somewhere in those French words I heard familiar phrases, conjugations, sentence structures that I'd been studying for the past 3 years. "Dad," I said slowly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think I might be able to help." He looked at me like I'd just announced I could fly to the moon. "Emma, honey, this isn't the time for—" "I'm serious, Dad. I've been taking French classes since 4th grade. Mrs. Rodriguez says I have a natural ear for languages. I'm not fluent, but I can understand a lot more than people think." The skepticism in his eyes was painful, but understandable. To him, I was still the little girl who needed help tying her shoes, who cried when she lost her favorite stuffed animal, who struggled with long division. The idea that I could solve a problem that had stumped the entire executive team probably seemed impossible, but I knew something Dad didn't know. I knew about the hours I'd spent listening to French podcasts while doing homework, about the French films I'd watched with subtitles, about the way language had become my secret passion in a world where I felt largely invisible. I knew about the journal I kept where I wrote my thoughts in French, practicing expressions and grammar until they felt natural in my mouth. "Please, Dad, let me at least try to listen. Maybe I can help somehow." He studied my face for a long moment, and I could see the internal battle playing out behind his eyes. The protective father warring with the desperate employee, the man who'd always encouraged my education, fighting against the fear of putting me in a situation I couldn't handle. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Okay, but you stay close to me, and if things get too intense, you leave immediately. Promise me." "I promise." We made our way down the hallway toward the conference room, our footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. With each step, the voices grew louder, more agitated. I could hear the desperation creeping into both languages, the way people sound when they're running out of options and time. The conference room doors were heavy glass, and through them, I could see the most important people in the company sitting around a massive mahogany table. At the head sat Mr. Harrison, the CEO, his usually perfect silver hair disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled from stress. His face was flushed red, and he kept dabbing at his forehead with a handkerchief, looking every bit like a man watching his life's work crumble before his eyes. Across from him sat 3 impeccably dressed French investors. Even from the hallway, I could see their frustration mounting. They kept exchanging glances, speaking in rapid French that grew more animated with each passing minute. Their body language spoke of people who were losing patience, who had other deals to consider, other opportunities that didn't require this level of complication. Between them sat various executives and lawyers, all looking helpless and increasingly panicked. Papers were scattered across the table, tablets and laptops open but seemingly useless without the ability to properly communicate. The air in the room felt thick with tension, like the moment before a thunderstorm when everything feels charged and dangerous. "They're talking about leaving," I whispered to Dad, catching fragments of the French conversation. Something about Chicago being a waste of time, about how unprofessional this whole situation is. Dad's face went pale. "Are you sure?" I nodded, my stomach churning as I caught more of the conversation. The French investors were discussing their flight times, mentioning other cities, other companies that might be worth their investment. Every word felt like another nail in the coffin of everything my family depended on. That's when Mr. Harrison stood up, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that made everyone in the room freeze. His voice, when he spoke, was shaky with desperation. "Please, messieurs, I know this is frustrating. We're trying to find another translator, but in the meantime, perhaps we could—" "Non, non, c'est impossible." The lead investor's voice cut through the air like a knife. Nous ne pouvons pas continuer comme ça. C'est du temps perdu. I watched Mr. Harrison's face crumble as he realized he was losing them. This man who commanded boardrooms, who made decisions that affected thousands of people, was reduced to helpless gestures and pleading eyes. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and everyone in the room could feel it. Dad, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I need to go in there. Emma, absolutely not. You're 12 years old. You can't. I can understand what they're saying, and I can help translate. Maybe not perfectly, but better than nothing. Dad, if they leave, what happens to us? What happens to everyone who works here? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. I could see Dad wrestling with every protective instinct he had, weighing the risks of putting his daughter in an impossible situation against the very real possibility that we might lose everything if someone didn't act soon. The French voices grew louder, more agitated. Through the glass, I could see the investors gathering their papers, preparing to leave. Mr. Harrison looked like he might collapse from the stress, his hands shaking as he tried once more to communicate through gestures and broken French phrases. Ils partent, I said urgently. They're leaving, Dad. Right now. That's when Dad made the decision that changed everything. He looked at me with those tired brown eyes, and I saw him make the choice to trust me in a way he never had before. Not as his little girl who needed protection, but as someone who might actually be able to help when no one else could. Okay, he said quietly, but I'm going with you, and we're doing this together. He knocked on the conference room door, and when Mr. Harrison looked up with barely concealed irritation, Dad stepped forward with a confidence I'd never seen from him before. Mr. Harrison, sir, I think my daughter might be able to help with the translation issue. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to me, and I felt my face burn with embarrassment and terror. These were the most powerful people I'd ever been in the same room with, and they were all staring at me like I'd just proposed to solve world hunger with a lemonade stand. Mr. Harrison's expression went through several phases. Confusion, disbelief, and finally, desperate hope. Your daughter? But she's been studying French for 3 years, Dad interrupted, his voice carrying a pride that made my chest swell. She's got a gift for languages, and right now, she might be our only option. The French investors were watching this exchange with growing curiosity. I could see them whispering among themselves, probably wondering why a janitor and his daughter were interrupting their important meeting. But I also caught something else in their expressions, a flicker of interest, maybe even amusement at the unexpected turn of events. Bonjour, I said, my voice small but clear. Je m'appelle Emma. Je sais que cette situation est frustrante pour vous, mais peut-être que je peux aider? The effect was immediate. The lead investor's eyebrows shot up, and he leaned forward in his chair. Tu parles français? Un peu, I replied, my confidence growing slightly. Je comprends beaucoup plus que je ne peux parler, mais je peux essayer de traduire si vous voulez bien être patient avec moi. Mr. Harrison looked between me and the French investors, like he'd stumbled into some kind of alternate reality. What did you just say? I told them I speak a little French and understand more than I can speak, and I offered to try translating if they'll be patient with me. I turned to the investors. Ils voudraient que je traduise ce que vous dites en anglais et vice-versa. Je ne suis pas parfaite, mais je peux essayer. The lead investor, a distinguished man with silver hair and kind eyes, smiled for the first time since I'd been watching. C'est incroyable. Une jeune fille qui parle mieux français que la plupart des adultes américains que j'ai rencontrés. He says it's incredible that a young girl speaks better French than most American adults he's met, I translated, feeling a flush of pride at the compliment. Mr. Harrison gestured to an empty chair. Please, sit down, both of you. Dad and I took seats at the massive table, and I felt the weight of the moment settling around me. This wasn't just about proving I could speak French. This was about saving jobs, about keeping families together, about being the bridge between two worlds that desperately needed to understand each other. Okay, Mr. Harrison said, his voice shaky but hopeful. Let's start with the basics. Can you ask them if they're still interested in investing in our company? I took a deep breath and turned to the French investors. Messieurs, malgré les problèmes de communication d'aujourd'hui, Êtes-vous toujours intéressé par un investissement dans Meridian Industries? The lead investor exchanged glance with his colleagues before responding. Nous sommes intéressés par l'entreprise, mais nous sommes inquiets au sujet de la gestion. Comment pouvons-nous faire confiance à une société qui ne peut même pas organiser une réunion correctement? My heart sunk as I translated. They're interested in the company, but they're worried about management. They want to know how they can trust a company that can't even organize a meeting properly. I watched Mr. Harrison's face fall, and something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about translation anymore. This was about advocacy, about fighting for the people I cared about. I thought about Dad, working late nights to keep the building spotless, about the security guard who always had a kind word for me, about all the families who depended on this company. Mr. Harrison, I said carefully, may I explain to them what really happened? About the translator getting sick, about how this isn't normally how things work here? He nodded desperately. Yes, please. Anything that might help. I turned back to the French investors, searching for the right words.
Messieurs, je voudrais vous expliquer ce qui s'est passé aujourd'hui. La traductrice professionnelle est tombée malade ce matin, et l'entreprise n'a pas eu le temps de trouver un remplacement. Normalement, Meridian Industries est très bien organisée. Mon père travaille ici depuis 15 ans, et il m'a toujours dit que c'était une entreprise sérieuse et professionnelle. The investors listened intently as I continued. Ce qui se passe aujourd'hui n'est pas normal.
C'est juste un problème imprévu. Mais le fait que tout le monde soit si inquiet montre à quel point cette collaboration est importante pour eux. One of the investors, a woman with sharp eyes and an elegant suite, leaned forward. Tu es la fille du concierge? Oui, madame. Mon père nettoie ses bureaux depuis que j'ai 2 ans. Je connais cette entreprise et je sais que les gens ici travaillent dur et se soucient de leur travail. She smiled and said something to her colleagues in rapid French. I caught the gist. She was impressed by my honesty and by the fact that I was advocating for the company despite my young age. What did she say? Mr. Harrison asked anxiously. She asked if I was the janitor's daughter, and I said yes. I told them that my father has been cleaning these offices since I was 2 years old, and that I know this company and the people here work hard and care about their jobs. The lead investor spoke up. Dis-nous, Emma, qu'est-ce que tu penses vraiment de cette entreprise? Sois honnête. I looked around the room, at Mr. Harrison's desperate face, at Dad's encouraging nod, at the executives who were hanging on every word. Then I thought about what I really knew about Meridian Industries. Not from business reports or financial statements, but from the people who made it run every day. Monsieur, je vais être honnête avec vous. Je ne connais pas les détails financiers ou les stratégies commerciales. Mais je sais que les gens ici se soucient les uns des autres. Quand mon père était malade, l'année dernière, ses collègues ont couvert son travail sans se plaindre. Quand la réceptionniste a eu des problèmes familiaux, tout le monde s'est cotisé pour l'aider. C'est une entreprise où les gens se traitent comme une famille. I paused, gathering my thoughts, before continuing. Je sais aussi que Monsieur Harrison connaît le nom de chaque employé, même ceux qui travaillent la nuit. Il demande des nouvelles de leur famille, et il s'assure que tout le monde a ce dont il a besoin pour bien faire son travail. Ce n'est pas juste une entreprise, c'est une communauté. The room was silent as I finished speaking. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for the translation that might determine their futures. I told them I don't know the financial details or business strategies, but I know that people here care about each other. When my father was sick last year, his colleagues covered his work without complaining. When the receptionist had family problems, everyone pitched in to help her. It's a company where people treat each other like family. I took a breath before continuing. I also told them that Mr. Harrison knows every employee's name, even those who work at night. He asks about their families and makes sure everyone has what they need to do their jobs well. It's not just a company, it's a community. Mr. Harrison's eyes filled with tears, and I saw him mouth, "Thank you," to me. Around the table, the other executives were nodding, recognition dawning on their faces. This 12-year-old girl was saying things about their company that they'd never thought to articulate to investors.
The French investors were talking among themselves, their tone noticeably warmer than before.
The lead investor turned back to me with a smile. Emma, tu es très impressionnante. Peux-tu nous expliquer maintenant pourquoi nous devrions investir dans cette entreprise? Pas les raisons financières, mais les raisons humaines? My heart was racing, but I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me.
This was my moment to really make a difference, to speak for everyone who couldn't speak for themselves. He wants me to explain why they should invest in this company, not the financial reasons, but the human reasons, I told the room. Then I turned back to the investors and took the biggest risk of my 12-year-old life.
Messieurs, dames, vous investissez dans les entreprises parce que vous croyez qu'elles vont réussir, n'est-ce pas? Mais le succès ne vient pas seulement des chiffres ou des stratégies. Il vient des gens qui se lèvent chaque matin et qui décident de donner le meilleur d'eux-mêmes. I could feel the room holding its breath as I continued. Ici, à Meridian Industries, j'ai grandi en voyant des gens qui sont fiers de leur travail. Mon père nettoie ses bureaux comme si c'était sa propre maison.
Les ingénieurs restent tard le soir pour résoudre des problèmes, pas parce qu'on leur dit de le faire, mais parce qu'ils se soucient du résultat. Les secrétaires connaissent les noms des enfants de leurs collègues et se rappellent des anniversaires. I paused, looking around at the faces watching me, some crying, some smiling, all listening intently. Une entreprise qui prend soin de ses employés aura des employés qui prendront soin de l'entreprise. C'est la base du succès à long terme. Vous ne pouvez pas acheter cette loyauté, cette dédication. Elle doit être cultivée, respectée, valorisée. The female investor was wiping her eyes, and even the stern-looking man beside her was nodding appreciatively. Alors oui, peut-être qu'aujourd'hui n'était pas parfait. Peut-être que nous aurions dû avoir un traducteur professionnel. Mais le fait que vous ayez une fille de 12 ans qui se bat pour cette entreprise, qui croit en ces gens, ça ne vous dit pas quelque chose sur le genre d'endroit que c'est? I finished speaking and realized my hands were shaking. The room was completely silent, and I suddenly felt very young and very scared. Had I said too much? Had I overstepped in some horrible way? What did you tell them? Mr. Harrison asked softly. I swallowed hard. I told them that success doesn't just come from numbers or strategies, but from people who wake up every morning and decide to give their best. I told them about how Dad takes pride in cleaning these offices like they're his own home, how engineers stay late to solve problems because they care about the results, how secretaries remember their colleagues' children's names and birthdays. I looked around the room, seeing the impact of my words reflected in everyone's faces. I told them that a company that takes care of its employees will have employees who take care of the company. That's the foundation of long-term success. You can't buy that loyalty and dedication. It has to be cultivated, respected, valued. Mr. Harrison was openly crying now, and I saw several other executives wiping their eyes. And I told them that maybe today wasn't perfect. Maybe we should have had a professional translator. But the fact that you have a 12-year-old girl fighting for this company, believing in these people, doesn't that tell them something about what kind of place this is? The lead investor stood up slowly and walked around the table to where I was sitting. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Had I made a terrible mistake? He knelt down beside my chair and spoke in heavily accented but clear English. Emma, in 30 years of business, I have never heard anyone speak about a company with such passion and sincerity. You have shown us something that no financial report could ever capture, the heart of this organization. He turned to address the room. We came here today to evaluate an investment opportunity. We leave having witnessed something far more valuable, the true spirit of what makes a company great. Standing back up, he looked directly at Mr. Harrison. We would be honored to invest in Meridian Industries, not just because of your financial projections, but because of the culture you have created here. A culture that inspires a young girl to speak so eloquently on your behalf. The room erupted in applause, and I felt Dad's hand on my shoulder, squeezing gently. The relief on Mr. Harrison's face was so profound it was almost painful to watch. Executive after executive was shaking hands with the French investors. Papers were being shuffled, and suddenly the crisis that had seemed so insurmountable was over. But as the celebration continued around me, I felt something shift inside myself. For the first time in my life, I had been the one with the solution. I had been the one who could do something that no one else could do. I had taken my small skill, my passion for French language, and turned it into something that mattered, something that made a real difference in the world. The female investor approached me as the meeting began to wind down. "Emma, what you did today was remarkable.
Have you ever considered a career in international business? Or perhaps translation?" I looked at her. This sophisticated woman who had traveled across an ocean to be here, who made decisions that affected thousands of people, who was now asking me about my future as if my answer mattered. "I never really thought about it," I said honestly. "I just liked learning French because it was beautiful, and it made me feel connected to something bigger than myself." She smiled.
That's exactly why you would be good at it. Language isn't just about words. It's about building bridges between people, about finding common ground even when everything else seems different. As the investors prepared to leave, the lead investor shook my hand formally. "Emma, you have a gift, but more importantly, you have courage. Never lose that." After they left, the conference room slowly emptied as executives headed off to begin the work of implementing the new partnership. Finally, it was just me, Dad, and Mr. Harrison. "Emma," Mr. Harrison said, his voice still shaky with emotion, "I don't know how to thank you. You saved this company today. You saved hundreds of jobs, including your father's." I looked at Dad, who was beaming with pride, and felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the praise I was receiving. It was the warmth of knowing that I had stood up for something important, that I had found my voice when it mattered most. "I just did what I could," I said. "I couldn't let them leave without understanding what this place really means to people." Mr. Harrison nodded. "That's exactly what leadership is. Doing what you can when others can't. You're going to go far in life, Emma Thompson." As we walked back to the elevator, Dad was unusually quiet. It wasn't until we were alone in the hallway that he finally spoke. "Emma, I've never been prouder of you than I am right now. Not just because of what you did in that room, but because of why you did it. You stood up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves." I felt tears starting to build behind my eyes. "Dad, I was so scared. What if I had said something wrong? What if I had made things worse?" He stopped walking and turned to face me. "But you didn't. You spoke from your heart, and that's always the right thing to do. You showed those investors something they couldn't have learned from any business presentation, that this company is made up of people who care about each other." As we rode the elevator down, I thought about everything that had happened. This morning, I had been just Emma Thompson, the janitor's daughter, invisible and unremarkable. Now, I was Emma Thompson, the girl who had saved the company, who had found her voice when it mattered most. But more than that, I was Emma Thompson, the girl who had learned that sometimes the most important moments in life come when we step outside our comfort zones and do what needs to be done, even when we're scared. The elevator doors opened to the lobby, and I saw the security guard who always waved at me. Today, he didn't just wave. He stood up and applauded as Dad and I walked past. Word had already spread through the building about what had happened upstairs. "Way to go, Emma," he called out. "You're a hero." I blushed and waved back, still not entirely comfortable with the attention. But as we walked toward the exit, I felt something I'd never felt before, a sense of my own power, my own ability to make a difference in the world. Outside, the Chicago wind was brisk, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and the promise of winter. Dad and I walked in comfortable silence for a few blocks before he spoke again. "You know, Emma, what you did today wasn't just about translation. It was about communication in the deepest sense, helping people understand each other, building connections across differences." I nodded, thinking about the female investor's words about building bridges between people. "Dad, do you think I could really have a career in international business or translation?" He smiled. "Honey, after what I saw today, I think you could have a career in anything you want. But whatever you choose, I hope you remember this feeling, the feeling of using your gifts to help others." As we approached our apartment building, I realized that this day had changed everything. Not just for the company, not just for the employees who would keep their jobs, but for me. I had discovered something about myself that I never knew existed. The ability to stand up, speak out, and make a difference when it mattered most. The next morning, I woke up to find my story on the front page of the local business section. 12-year-old saves major deal, read the headline, with a photo of me shaking hands with the French investors. The article described me as a young hero who stepped up when corporate America couldn't. But as I read the article, I realized that the real story wasn't about me being a hero. It was about the power of language, the importance of understanding, and the incredible things that can happen when we find the courage to use our gifts in service of others. At school that day, I was something of a celebrity. Teachers I'd never spoken to before congratulated me in the hallways. Classmates who had never noticed me wanted to hear the whole story. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. But the attention that meant the most came from Mrs. Rodriguez, my French teacher. She pulled me aside after class with tears in her eyes. "Emma, I've been teaching French for 20 years, and I've never had a student use the language to make such a profound impact. You've shown everyone the true power of being bilingual, not just knowing words, but being able to bring people together." She handed me a small, wrapped package. "I want you to have this." Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal with Emma Thompson, interpreter, embossed on the cover. "I thought you might want to start keeping track of your language learning journey," she said. "I have a feeling this is just the beginning for you." That afternoon, I sat in my room with the journal open on my desk, trying to find the words to describe what had happened. How do you capture the moment when your entire understanding of yourself shifts? When you realize that you're capable of things you never dreamed possible? I started writing in French, the language that had opened this door for me. Hier, j'ai appris que les mots ont un pouvoir que je ne comprenais pas avant. J'ai appris que parfois, être brave ne veut pas dire ne pas avoir peur. Ça veut dire faire ce qui est juste même quand on a peur. Yesterday, I learned that words have a power I didn't understand before. I learned that sometimes, being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what's right, even when you are scared. As I wrote, I thought about the female investor's words about building bridges between people. I thought about Dad's pride, about Mr. Harrison's tears, about the security guard's applause. I thought about all the families who would have steady paychecks because of what had happened in that conference room. But most of all, I thought about the girl I had been yesterday morning, quiet, invisible, uncertain of her place in the world. And I thought about the girl I was now, still young, still learning, but no longer invisible, no longer afraid to use her voice when it mattered. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Dad called me to the kitchen to take the call. "Emma, this is Sarah Chen from the Chicago Tribune. I'm working on a follow-up story about yesterday's events, and I was wondering if you'd be willing to do an interview." I looked at Dad, who nodded encouragingly. "Sure," I said. "I'd be happy to talk to you." As I answered the reporter's questions about my experience, about what it felt like to be in that room, about what I hoped to do with my language skills in the future, I realized something important. This story was bigger than just me. It was about the power of young people to make a difference, about the importance of nurturing talents in unexpected places, about the way crisis can reveal hidden strengths. "One last question, Emma," the reporter said. "What would you say to other young people who might be afraid to speak up or use their talents?" I thought for a moment, remembering the terror I'd felt walking into that conference room, the way my hands had shaken as I spoke French to those important investors. I'd tell them that being scared is okay. I was terrified. But I'd also tell them that they have gifts they don't even know about yet, and sometimes the world needs those gifts, even when they don't feel ready. I paused, thinking about the leather journal upstairs, about the future that suddenly seemed full of possibilities. And I'd tell them that you don't have to be perfect to make a difference. You just have to be willing to try. After I hung up, Dad and I sat at the kitchen table, sharing a quiet dinner. The events of the past day felt almost surreal, but the changes they had brought to our lives were very real. "Dad, do you think things will be different now?" I asked. He smiled. "I think everything will be different now, Emma. For the company, for our family, and especially for you. You've shown yourself what you're capable of, and that's something no one can ever take away from you." As I got ready for bed that night, I stood in front of my mirror and looked at myself. really looked. I saw the same brown eyes, the same unruly hair, the same freckles across my nose. But I also saw something new: confidence, purpose, a sense of my own power that hadn't been there before. I picked up the leather journal and wrote one more entry before sleep. Today I learned that being invisible isn't the same as being powerless. Sometimes the quiet ones, the ones no one expects, are the ones who can change everything. I'm not invisible.